Joyce, ella llega desde California, del Silicon Valley, de Sunnyvale más precisamente. Nosotros estamos en la tierra de los duraznos, ella está en la tierra de los apricots, que no sé cómo es que se traduce. Y bueno, gracias a ella, ya les dije, yo aprendí a programar con el libro de PHP que escribió hace mucho tiempo. Y bueno, en cierto aspecto la conferencia esta no existiría en Durazno si aquel libro no hubiera llegado desde Estados Unidos a Durazno. Así que, por favor, fuerte aplauso para Joyce.
Hola, estimados, discúlpenme por no poder presentar esta charla en español. That's all the Spanish you're going to hear from me. Sorry. So, I am a programmer. I became a programmer in Silicon Valley when I was 30 years old. So I started very late in life. And kind of by accident, by getting fired a lot from a lot of jobs, I ended up becoming a founder of two venture-backed startups. I raised about a little more than $10 million between the two of them in venture money. But what I'm most proud of, and sort of what I'm representing here, is I'm the co-founder of 106 Miles, which is, I think, the largest technical meetup or the largest technical business meetup in the whole system. We've been running it for 12 years. So in that time, we've, I hope, helped a lot of entrepreneurial engineers and people who wanted to work for startups. So in this talk, I'm going to try to crunch everything that we've told every startup into 25 minutes. What time is it? Oh, okay. And I hope it's not too boring, because a lot of it is about sort of governance stuff, which you only hear about usually when things go really, really wrong. So let's go. What do I... Come on. Oh, it's this thing. Sorry. Where do I plug it into? It wouldn't be a talk without a technical problem. Okay. Oh, shit. Yes, yes. Woo! So, can you see the labels? Yes. Okay, great. So this is my personal assessment of sort of what makes Silicon Valley great, and it's probably maybe a little bit different from what you guys think. But I'm going to walk you through why I think this and sort of the different moving parts that all had to come together to, I think, make Silicon Valley number one in startups. And at the end of the talk, we're going to get to why it's all falling apart and how you can profit from this. Probably the part you're most interested in is the VC part, and we're going to get to that. But I want to talk about the others first because they're much less known, I think, outside of Silicon Valley. Okay, services. So I usually find that when entrepreneurs go to Silicon Valley, they're trying to get meetings with VCs. That's not what you're supposed to do. What you really want to do is you want to meet the right lawyer. And to do that, you need an introduction. You're not going to just drive up to the lawyer's office and like, you know, hey, I heard that you worked for Facebook when they first incorporated. I want you. People have tried to do this. That's my lawyer. And it does not work well. What you need to do is make enough friends that you can get an introduction to the right lawyer. And the lawyers work on both sides of every financing deal. So they know all of the bad VCs. They've seen it all because they've written the papers. So they know the good VCs. They know, if you need it, they can give you an office to work in. They're really going to be your friends if you get the right one. Also, I would say for any kind of IP-related work, I have never met anybody who was happy with IP work where they didn't use a Silicon Valley lawyer eventually. So if you have some sort of IP dispute, I really suggest that you go to the source. Also, you might be surprised to know that we have specialized financial services. When Mark Zuckerberg needs to get a mortgage for his house, or so he can buy, like, I think he got a mortgage so he could buy part of Hawaii? Like half an island in Hawaii? I'm not kidding. You know, there's a special bank that loans against the value of his stock. When Elon Musk had to get divorced and he had to have his stock assessed for its value, you know, because we have community property, so the wife got half. There was somebody who specializes in that. We also have, obviously, IPO and M&A related services. For instance, any M&A, you're going to have an outside expert talk about the valuation. Like, we can just pick up the phone, call somebody, and have that done. And those are the kind of specialized services. Obviously, we have co-working spaces. I think WeWork is here. Incubators, but also, the really good thing is free office space. So when I started my first startup in 2005, we, as everyone else did at that time, we went to Reid Hoffman, and we asked him for funding, for angel funding. He listened to the pitch. He said no. But sort of our consolation prize was to be able to have free office space in LinkedIn. And we weren't the only ones. There was another company right next to us. You might have heard of them. They were YouTube. They also did not get the investment, but they got the free office space. And I have some stories about them, but not on TV. We have coaches, and actually we have therapists, especially for like founding teams that, you know, founding teams, it's like a marriage without the love. And sometimes when you feel like you need a divorce, not looking at you, I mean, sometimes you need to go to like a founder counselor, and sometimes that will really help you out. And then obviously we have networking groups of all kinds, like 106 Miles, where you can go and hopefully find people who have had the same experience as you and can, you know, tell you the truth, which is, it's very hard in Silicon Valley because an engineer with a great idea and with a lot of energy, everyone else makes money off that person. So they're all, none of them are in the position to tell you the truth. And so only another engineer who's gone through it before you. That's the reason I started 106 Miles, because I couldn't find a group like that when I was an early entrepreneur. Federal laws, obviously, they're going to be different everywhere, but these are things that really, really, really have helped Silicon Valley. And they're things that you can change in your home countries, I think, maybe, to help you too. Number one, obviously, immigration. We're going to get to this in a couple of slides, but without immigration, there is no Silicon Valley. And the more immigration, in my view, the better off we're going to be. I'm an immigrant. We get the job done, and it's absolutely critical for us. We also have, or had, strong IP law enforcement compared to a lot of countries. You know, a few years ago, during the downturn, a lot of companies were thinking about outsourcing their stuff to India, China, Russia. I was like, have you ever been to an IP court there? I don't think so. They're not putting their best people on IP law in those countries often. Obviously, we have net neutrality for a few more days. We have very favorable tax treatment of stock options. Without this, there would have been no Silicon Valley, obviously, because we don't have to pay tax generally until we actually have money, which is not the case everywhere. And then finally, it's not very sexy, but we have good, strong corporate governance rules, which mean that, for instance, if you feel that the board of a company has voted in a way that is completely self-serving, you can very easily, under our corporate governance, sue them. And we were joking earlier, like, what is it to be American without suing somebody? But it's kind of true. I can't lie. Okay, California laws are also very important for Silicon Valley, and I think little understood. But the net is that California laws very much strengthen the position of employees versus employers. And it also makes it easy to fire employees, but that turns out to be actually net good for us, good for the employee, not so good for the employer. And it's sort of paradoxical, but basically everything that makes it easy for people to leave and start their own company is good for startups. And the best law ever for that is what we call the California non-compete, which is you cannot have anything in any employment contract limiting an employee's right to practice their trade after they leave your company. You can't say anything about what they do with what's in here. You can stop them from taking their Rolodex. You can stop them from taking code. Obviously, the code belongs to you. You can stop them from taking emails, phone numbers of customers, all of that stuff, but you cannot stop them from taking anything that's in their head. And if you try, the entire contract is null and void forever. Like, you can't even litigate it. It's just null and void right there. And even the thing about non-solicitation, which is if you both leave the company not at the same time and he wants to hire you, like, he can sign a non-solicitation, but it's very hard to enforce. The way everybody gets around it is if you ask him for a job, then he's in the clear. So, so I have never seen one enforced. And my lawyer says that they're basically impossible to enforce. You would have to prove in black and white that the person who solicited did it with, in gross disregard. So you'd have to catch them red-handed in black and white. And who's going to be that dumb? They shouldn't be starting a company if they're that dumb. The California Fair Pay Act, again, this is a relatively recent law that means you cannot, you have to pay people regardless of their gender, their race, all of those things. You have to pay them the same amount, not just for the same job title, but for the same actual job. So let's say you have two people and one of them, their title is data analyst, and the other one, their title is programmer. If they're doing essentially the same work, you have to pay them the same, and they can take you to court, because we love to sue. And this one only went into effect last year or 2 years ago, so most people don't know about it, but it's really, I think, going to end up helping women. And you can already see some companies, Salesforce is one, that went through all of their salaries and adjusted based on this law. And then we have a special law in California where you can, if you pay programmers, and it only applies to programmers, a certain amount, which is pretty high. I think right now it's over 100,000. They can work all the overtime that they want. So overtime is a very strict law usually, but if you pay a programmer enough, you can ignore the overtime rules. And so all of this net means there's really no downside to switching jobs or even getting fired. I've been fired from every job I've ever had, and I still get work, so. Okay. So our workforce is obviously a huge thing. 57% foreign-born. I think if you added in all of the people who are like the children of foreign-born parents, it would be, I'm guessing, 70% at least, 75%. So without immigration, no Silicon Valley. Another 25% were US born but outside California. So basically, the whole Silicon Valley is one generation away from being, you know, not from there. There's really hardly anybody from there. Only 30% women, and unfortunately only 50% in technical roles at best. And we're working to change that, but it is what it is. But we're 100% self-selected to prioritize working in startups. You know, every one of these people has left their families, their hometowns, their alumni networks, you know, their favorite football team. You know, they've left all of that behind to chase their dream. And what do they get in return? What we have that I think is hard to get anywhere else is experience at scale. So I've worked in Silicon Valley now for almost 18 years, and I think in that time, I've only worked for one company where we didn't have at least 10 million uniques a month, often much more. So it's easy to find companies in Silicon Valley that can give you that kind of scale, and you learn things at that kind of scale that you don't learn, you know, pushing a lot fewer pages. Okay, our lifestyle. You know what? It's a lot easier to recruit if it looks like that all the time, or you have like all the foods of the world, or you can go to Yosemite. But you guys actually have a lot of these advantages too. So, you know, I think it would be harder to like recruit if you were, I don't know, in Germany and it was raining all the time and, you know, you had to speak German and eat German food. Oh, I'm really proud of this slide. I want you guys to know. You used to have to go to business school to learn how to do this. Look at this. All right, this is the classic Silicon Valley life cycle. So you would get your angel money, which was, when I did my first startup in 2005, this was still true. It's completely not true anymore. But this is the classic model that's in everybody's head. So you would get your angel money to do a prototype, not even a beta, an alpha. And then you would get your A round from your first institutional investor. And this guy is your daddy. I mean, this is really marriage without the love, because you're going to be stuck with this guy forever. I mean, you're going to go to his funeral. So if you don't like him, it's going to color your whole experience. And I have known many entrepreneurs who sold their companies to get away from this guy. So it's critical that you like this guy, or at least you don't hate him. Woo. And then you would do your B to F rounds. If you were like the greatest company in the world, like Google, they only did an A round, and they deliberately took equal investments from 2 VCs so that they didn't have to deal with the daddy problem. It was like having 2 stepdads. You wouldn't want to go above an F round. That would be a sign of loserdom. Then you'd IPO, you'd go to the NASDAQ, ring the bell. And then this is the critical part. The VC firm would return capital to their limited partners, who are largely universities. So Yale, Harvard, the University of California system, all of them had a lot of money in VC funds and also pension funds to a certain extent. And remember, this return of capital, the whole cycle, has to occur within about 10 years, often less. So if you think about it, you know, I think Airbnb's 9 years old now. So they should be well on the way to this, but they're not. Okay, and then the founder becomes a VC. That's like the next step. We call it being bitten on the neck by a vampire. That's how new VCs get made. Okay, so what disrupted the classic model? That doesn't happen anymore. Basically, for whatever series of reasons, the successful companies, the winners, the unicorns, decided to stop IPOing. And in particular, they don't want to IPO on that timeline anymore. So why is that? Well, you can see that these companies have something in common, which is that many of them went through YC, Y Combinator, or have a connection to Peter Thiel, who also is very connected to Y Combinator, or both. So there's some names there: Uber, Airbnb, Palantir, Reddit, Dropbox. Not only is everybody waiting for them to IPO, in some cases, they're being sued because they won't IPO. And it's a really, really big problem. Techstars has only had one IPO. So of all of Y Combinator and Techstars, there's been one IPO in the whole time. And it happened 1 week ago, 10 days ago. So what happens? Founders get theirs, and the employees, and especially the early funders who expect more return on their investment, tend to get screwed. But in this case, for various reasons, maybe they don't care as much as they used to. Okay, but there's like a bigger history here. I'm not just blaming YC. How can I explain this? So the angel pool used to be very, very small because it was strictly through word of mouth. You had to know somebody in Silicon Valley to get an angel investment in the first place. And then a friend of mine, Naval Ravikant, started angel.co, Angel List. And that increased the pool quite a bit. And you know, people like McClure raised angel funds where they, you know, had a lot of angel money to go around. So instead of the angel just being sort of like the proof of concept, and then the VC used to fund you to build the actual product, now nobody wanted to build a product anymore. Nobody wanted to pay. Now they only want to fund you if you've already taken off like a rocket ship before you get to that point. Like, for instance, you know, the classical thing is Facebook. They were already taken off. People were throwing money at them. So they had already built to the point that an A round would have taken them before they sought an A round. And therefore, all the VCs were like, this is great. I can just cherry pick the ones that have gotten here without needing me. Well, what happens when you set up your whole business so that people don't need you anymore? It's like, maybe not so smart in the long run. But also, there's a lot of, you know what, rich people around the world are getting richer. And they're not spending that money. I mean, there's only so many yachts you can buy. So they're putting it into, you know, these type of investments through private equity, secondary markets, mutual funds, and sovereign wealth funds. So now, it used to be completely unheard of for someone like Charles Schwab, you know, which runs mutual funds, to put money into a pre-IPO company. But now, Charles Schwab says, if we wait until they go to the market, we already have lost a lot of the potential value. So we don't want to do that anymore. And so what happened, the first thing that sort of happened where people realized this was happening was the so-called A-round crunch, where people would get more angel funding than they used to, but when they went for an A round, a real institutional round with a daddy, like, nobody wanted to do that anymore. So There's also even newer sources of funding, like crowdfunding and ICOs. But also, and this is where the story turns dark, many of these non-IPO companies, these defiantly non-IPO companies, have had serious governance issues, very, very serious governance issues. And as I'm sure you all know, particularly between female founders and male VCs, there's really been a crisis that has recently come to light. And trust between VCs and founders, I would say, is at the lowest ebb that I've ever seen in my entire career. It's really, really low. Like, a lot of VCs, because of this, their answer is, I'm not going to be in a room with a woman anymore. Like, how's that an answer to anything? You know, obviously, VCs are trying to pressure their companies that won't IPO to do so, and that's not going well because you don't really need that daddy anymore. You don't need him to introduce you to the whole machinery of taking your company public. And frankly, I have a friend who went public last year, and he said if he had it to do over, he wouldn't do it. You know, it isn't necessarily all happily ever after. You're selling your company to a bunch of shareholders who find it easy to sue you, because that's the American way. Also, VCs are less comfortable with newer markets. They're comfortable with selling stuff to people who are just like them. And they are very, very uncomfortable. For instance, I myself have been told to my face, like, oh, I will or won't fund you because my wife likes your product. Like, what is your wife? Does your wife invest? I mean, but, you know, if you're ignoring, like, the female half of the world, how do you expect to, you know, be innovative and make money? And all of this, a lot of this has been sort of summed up in a paper from Harvard Business School that I just read recently called Disruptors versus Builders. And it posited that for whatever reason, people who use the language of disruption, I want to disrupt the taxi industry, I want to disrupt the dog food industry, get more funding and more positive feedback than people who use the term builder. I want to build a business. I want to patiently grow it, you know. And guess what? There's a gender split there. Okay, so I didn't say this, but Uber's now hit for the Silicon Valley shit show cycle. Sexual harassment, board chaos, IP lawsuit, and massive hack. This understates what's really happening there. Because for us, the biggest problem there is that they won't IPO, they won't listen to any of their previous funders. I mean, they literally will just hang up the phone, and their daddy had to sue them to get them to change their governance so that they could be forced to IPO in 2019. And I don't know if you guys have noticed, but we have a newish president, and things are not going well. And in particular, many people in Silicon Valley feel that he is specifically targeting every policy that, particularly in the Obama administration, but even in previous administrations, had helped us. And it's the thing that we can't sort of wrap our heads around is this isn't going to help, like, Joe's six-pack, you know? Like, much as he sold it that way, this is going to help him, people who own private planes and people who, you know, own large, say, companies based on speculative real estate. So they obviously want to cut immigration. They say in half, but it's probably going to be more than half because they want to get rid of what's called sibling immigration. They want to tax loans and waivers, but they also want to tax endowments. And remember, this is where limited partner money comes from. So if you take 4% off the top of Harvard endowment every year, well, are they really going to put that money into venture capital? I don't know. We're having a housing crisis. There's no housing in the Bay Area. They want to get rid of they want to make us pay tax again on state and local tax. They want to get rid of equal pay protection because women who need them. They want to obviously get rid of health insurance. How do you start a company? In the US, it's very hard to start a company if you don't have Obamacare because, you know, health insurance. Antitrust is a new one. We've never heard of this before. But now they're saying the tech companies are too big and need to be broken up. Net neutrality, obviously, that one. Trade agreements, we backed out of all of them. And then finally, we've only recently become aware that social media is not just a way to, like, you know, keep in touch with your aunt, but it's a platform for political and personal harm, and they're not too sure what to do about it. But this is all good for you. Because as our position declines, and this is totally an own goal, I mean, we should be extending our lead, but instead we're giving it up for no reason that I can tell. Worse for us is better for you. So what I came here to say is steal all of our good ideas and implement them in your towns, in your states, in your countries. Make friends in Silicon Valley and get information from us about what services are actually going to be good for you, like the IP lawyers, and what maybe you don't need. Like, you know, if you can do blockchain more easily here, maybe you don't need a VC. In fact, I just had coffee with a notorious VC, and I asked him, if I were going to get money right now, if I needed $10 million right now, should I go to you or should I do an ICO? And he said, Joyce, you'd be stupid not to do the ICO because it's free money. It's non-dilutive. You don't give any shares of your stock for it. And if things go wrong, you don't have to give it back. They're not going to try to claw it back from you because there's no law. And go where we have trouble going. Start businesses in areas that we suck at. So some examples would be women. Just last week, we had a big IPO in the US for a company called Stitch Fix, which sends boxes of clothes to women, and they're sort of personalized, and the women keep the clothes that they want, and they just send back the clothes that they don't want. And it was sort of a cool moment for a lot of women because she managed to IPO while she had like a 2-year-old baby with her at the NASDAQ, you know, ringing the bell with her. And I thought that was cool. A global viewpoint, which very few American companies have. So I'm on the board of a nonprofit, an NGO, called Refugees United. And our mission is to reunite refugees around the world with their families using technology. So we have people that go into refugee camps and they register refugees, many of whom have different sorts of security concerns than you or me. And it turns out that even people in refugee camps have money and they have needs. They need services of different kinds. And so you would only know that by talking to, you know, people, refugees. And of course, that's going to be harder for us because we aren't going to have any refugees. And then finally, industries that have not traditionally been seen as tech industries are the ones where I'm seeing a lot of exciting stuff. So I'll give you an example. I have a friend who's an angel investor, and he invested in a company that what they do is they send drones up to take photographs of crops growing over the whole year. And from the photographs, they train machine learning to like figure out how the crops are growing, but even more like what are the underlying conditions? You know, is there was there a flood? You know, are they having a drought? And then I think not just farmers, but also people who speculate on the markets pay them for this information. And they're doing really, really well. And that's something that, you know, is necessary everywhere that there's crops, which, you know, you guys have plenty of crops. So I know companies that are doing interesting stuff with, you know, power generation, with, you know, a lot of these sort of shipping, obviously, a lot of these less glamorous, maybe, industries, but that's where a lot of money is, and there's no competition. I mean, those people in those industries, established players, are not going to be able to compete with you technologically. And that brings me to a big point, which is whatever you do, collect all the data that you can, because there's going to be a market for that stuff very soon, and you want to be in that market. So, I mean, Stitch Fix, the company I told you about, you know, that sends boxes of clothes to women, a lot of what they're actually doing under there is, you may not know this, but 69% of American women wear a plus size 14 or up, which is what, 44? 44 in your sizing. And they don't like to shop. It's a very unpleasant experience for them. A lot of them have quite a bit of money. And so there has not been good feedback mechanisms to date between the customer and the manufacturers who don't want to make clothes in that size and who are losing sales because of that. So Stitch Fix is in a great position to get all of that data and like set up, you know, some sort of exchange with manufacturers. And they say, I don't know if this is true or not, but I've heard that they do things like put different tags in the clothes to make it look like they're different sizes, you know, because it's their own distribution channel. They can do what they want. So whatever you do, get all the data and just keep it and learn how to use it. And then finally, I have to say, alternative funding is good, but revenue is what's going to make or break you. Okay, that's it for me. Woo.